So if you're unable to find screws that are long enough, they're just a little shorter, just like I showed you with the thumb, you'll want to use a little bit of removable Loctite, and instead of tightening the hinge all the way down, you'll just put on the Loctite there and then just tighten it down to the point where it doesn't cause any impedance in the hinge action. And so now we're just going to repeat the same thing with this side. Alright, so moving on next to creating the closure system. I have a couple of these plastic brackets. They're used for nylon strapping. So that'll be one side. These are going to be held to the side of the frame with the shorter flap of leather. They're going to be held there by this material, which is nylon strapping. It's very similar to the material that seatbelts are made out of. I found this at my local hardware store. This could also be found at a fabric store, sort of like maybe Joann's or something equivalent to that. And as you can see, that fits through there, and it'll anchor it to this side. Also, for the other side, for the Velcro, I'm going to use this product called One Wrap. I found this at Lowe's. It's a 1.5 inch width, and it's very strong, sturdy Velcro. And what I like about this is that it has on one side the hooks and the other side the loops of the Velcro. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to punch holes in the material, use a lighter to melt those holes and prevent any fraying from occurring, and then we're going to anchor the strap in between the forearm bar and the leather. So we're going to punch holes in it to correspond to the bolts. So the first thing that we'll want to do is loop this through here and measure this out so that we can see that, you know, with it through the holes, we want it to hang out so that it can flex back and forth like that, so it's not right up against the frame. And I can hold this off to the side to get a better sense of how close to the frame it'll be. Okay, maybe a little tighter there. Alright, so just about like that, and then what I'll do is take a sharp pair of scissors and cut right along there. So the length for the other bracket is going to be the same, so we can use our first piece to measure out our second one. Okay. Now that we have these cut, take a lighter and singe and melt the ends so that it'll fuse everything together and keep it from fraying. There we go. And then we can measure and punch the holes for the points at which it's going to mount to the bar. And this is actually going to require the punch that I removed from the rotary punch earlier. So let's push that back in. There we go. Switch to it. Okay. So you want a hole that's a little bit smaller than the size of your bolt, because the hole will expand a little when you melt it, and then also that helps to reduce the chance of fraying. Marking these can be a little tricky because you know, Sharpie and other markers don't show up well. If you have a silvered colored felt pen, that works really well, like a fabric pen. The other thing that you can do to mark this, though, is you can just use something sharp to poke a hole in it. at the center of where you want it to be. And what I'm doing here is I'm lining the holes up with the center points of these bolts. Actually, I'm going to shift this over a little bit because we're going to need these to be slightly off on this one. Okay, so we're just going to go down to about here. And create a dent in the material. That one. Okay, so I don't know if you can see it on the camera there, but there's 2 dents in it now. And that's what I'll use. And I'll just keep it folded in half, that way I end up with holes that are lined up with each other perfectly. And a really firm squeeze until you hear a snap, and then a twist to cut the fibers as well. Okay. Same thing on this side. Really firm squeeze until you hear that snap sound, and then give it a twist, which will cut the fibers. Okay. Alright, so we've got our holes through there. Now this is where we can clean them up with the lighter and prevent melting. Sorry, not melting. we want to melt. We want to prevent fraying. Okay. As you can see, my punch is not as sharp as it was when I first purchased it, so I'm going to have to go back through here with some scissors and cut the excess. Okay. There we go. So the little flaps that are sticking up from where it punched through but didn't cut completely. Alright, and so when melting the holes, you just want to have the tip of your flame basically go through. There we go. And you just hit it with the flame briefly from both sides. That way the heat's passing up through the center of the hole and fusing together all the fibers inside the hole. There we go. Got my thumb a little bit there. Alright. There. So now we've got our holes cleaned up. And then what you can do is you can just take and mirror those holes onto the next piece of material. And I'll do the same sort of deal here with... Okay, so now I've removed the lock nuts and detached this side of the forearm. You can see that, looking here, you can see how the leather's been pulled up into the wells of the forearm bar, so this is a really good example of how that works out. Okay. And so now what I'm going to do is I'll take and put the material through one of these brackets, and then put it over. Let's see, we're going to actually do this side first. Okay. And guide it over the holes. Alright. There we go. And double it over, put the top side on too. Okay. Okay. So we've got that generally started. Now we can guide the nuts, sorry, the bolts back through. Okay. And the next step will be to start from one end and thread the lock nuts back on. And you might take some pressure with these ones because we've added extra material in between now. So you just have to push really hard with your thumb from the other side and get the thread to bite. And that's where actually if we tighten down this one, it'll help to force that one up. And so on. So we'll kind of, yeah, so I'll need to do that. So we'll start, so you'll just want to tighten for this end and go that way. And it'll cinch it all back down. Okay, so now this is back on, and we have our brackets anchored. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put the long flap underneath, fold this flap over, and get a piece of our Velcro going here. We want to measure this out so that it has enough length to come over and secure to itself. So kind of like that. And then also, but also to go back and fit underneath this arm bar. And you're gonna have a different length, you know, on the back of the arm as opposed to on the front, because this tapers as we go. So I'll measure this first piece. Okay. Measure the next piece. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a difference there between these two. So just like we did on this side, we'll punch holes in this to allow it to be mounted to the forearm. And then also we're going to use needle and thread because we need to sew another piece of Velcro onto this so we'll have this through here. This is going to come and it needs to be able to attach to itself. So we'll need a patch of Velcro with the soft side up that goes from about where it's going to stick out of the forearm bar to about midway here to provide a surface to stick to. Alright, so now I went ahead and cut a couple of pieces, short pieces of Velcro, which I'm going to put soft side up so that after this loops through the bracket, it can fold back over onto itself and grip. And what we'll need to do is we'll need to sew this on here. Let's see, leaving enough space on this end for this to slide in between the frame. And we're just going to use a needle and thread. This is some pretty tough material. So if it doesn't go through easily using your fingers, this looks like it'll be okay. You can always use a pair of pliers to assist you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use thread that's been doubled up, so that it's so first off it's a very heavy thread, and then I'm doubling it to make it even stronger. And this will just be a standard back and forth stitch going all the way around, coming back here, and then you can tie it off. Okay, so the patches have been sewn on. The Velcro straps were installed via the same method that I showed earlier for installing these brackets. And now that this is all together, the longer leather strap can go down, the smaller one can go over. This can be slid through and secured. Same thing on the back here, slid through and secured. There we go. And that will provide the adjustable closure system. And then to remove it, it's as simple as that. Okay, so the last thing that remains before we move on to dipping the fingertips in some Plastidip is to set up the tensioning system and anchor the cables. So this is the 5-slot cable tensioner, co-developed with Frankie Flood and David Ogerman, also with some ideas thrown in there from various other members of the group, including Paul McCarthy. And it consists of 2 parts, well, 3 parts. So we have the base, these hexagonal pins with a hole in them to receive a machine screw, and also a hole on the other end for the cable. And we have, and then it fits together like so. So I'm going to start with the anchor for the thumb, which will be this one. And what we'll do is we'll put this in and orient this at an angle so that we can access the slot easily later. So like that, so that we can get to that hole for the cables. The machine screw is going to go from this end, and you're just going to get it started in the hole in the base of the hex pin. Okay. After you have that started, flathead screwdriver, and give it a few turns, and you'll notice that this should start to pull in. I don't know if it'll show up on the camera, but this will slowly start to pull into its slot. So after you've given it a few turns to make sure that you've got the screw started well in the hole, just give it a really firm pull, make sure it's in there. Then it's ready to have this anchored to it. I would actually go ahead and tighten it until it's a little, like about midway into the hole. That way you have the ability, after you've tightened the cable, to adjust the length in either direction. So what I would do is I'd just keep going until it's midway into the hole. Okay, so I'm going to do this for all the other pins, and then we'll move on to attaching the cables. Alright, so next I'm going to attach the finger cables to their anchoring points on the tensioning block. So I'll just kind of push some of these out of the way here. I'm going to start with the index finger, and then basically tie the others so that the tension is similar to that one. That'll also help me to figure out where to start with the thumb. So we're going to take our fishing line and go through the anchoring hole. And I have this up on a roll of painter's tape to hold the wrist in the fully open position, which for this person is going to be about here, and then this way the fully closed position will be at an angle about like that. So I found I determined this angle by looking at photographs. Okay, so I'm just going to tighten this until I start to see the finger wiggle a little bit. You see? Okay. The nice thing is, if this isn't 100% spot on, then we can adjust the we can adjust this peg back and forth to fine-tune the tightness of the fingers. Sorry, or rather the length of the cables and therefore the point at which they get pulled. I'm going to just tack my finger onto there so I can put my first hitch in this. Okay. Come through the loop. I'm just going to tighten this down really tight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a series of hitches like that. And you can see now we have it tensioned for that. There we go. So first I'm going to check this, and yep, that's about right. And like I said, we can fine tune it later. I'm just going to pile on a series of half hitches, and then after all of these are on and tied, I'm going to go back through with some super glue. Okay, so unfortunately my battery cut out on me, so there's some steps that are missing. So what I did is I finished off tying the cables on, and I applied a little bit of super glue to each of these knots, just like we did for the elastics. And once it dries, that'll keep it from unraveling. And then later, after it dries, I'm going to go through and just trim off the excess cable. Also, what I did is, you'll notice that these pins are now at different heights because I adjusted it. What I started doing is I started adjusting it so that the fingers close at a given rate. So now you'll see that the thumb and index finger meet up with each other. There's a little bit more adjustment that's needed to bring this middle finger down slightly more, but actually that's going to just be through lubricating this joint here. So you can see when it closes, because there's a little bit more friction on this joint than this one's curling down first. So if I apply a little bit of lubrication here and here, then these fingers will close like that instead. Also, I tightened the pinky further than the other fingers. This is from a suggestion from Peregrine, because he's found that the pinky can sort of act like a shelf for larger objects when he grabs them. But again, this is something that once the recipient gets it, this can be adjusted to calibrate the fingers to a different to his liking. If you want to adjust a finger so that it closes sooner, so let's say we trace back to the index finger. If we wanted to adjust the index finger so it closes sooner, then we would tighten the screw on the back, which will pull this in further. If we want to adjust it so that it closes later in the wrist motion, we would loosen this screw in the back to push the pin out further. Alright, so next I'm going to show dipping the fingers in Plastidip. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to do is apply Plastidip to the fingers. Plastidip is a kind of tool dip for creating rubberized coating, and it'll give the fingers grippiness. This can be found at most hardware stores or obtained online. And I moved out to the garage for this because you want to do this in a well-ventilated area. This stuff has some pretty nasty fumes, so I've got a ventilation fan running, and that'll help to deal with that. So I'm going to pour some of this into a container that I don't care about, because afterwards the container will have to be discarded. But we can pour what isn't used back into the can. So have a nice depth of that there. And then you just want to follow the instructions that are on this. You want to dip this slowly in. I've hooked up to one of the brackets underneath some scrap wire that I have so that I can hang this up to dry afterward. That's another really important part. So, starting with the thumb here, we're going to dip it in until we don't want it to get to the into the cable channel, so we're just going to dip it into about here and create a coating. So we're going to go slowly. Alright, and also kind of immerse the bungee hole, and then slowly pull it out, allow any excess to drip off. You can even see how there's a little bit of excess there. You can kind of pull that off by dipping it just ever so slightly in, and then this little tip that's sticking out, that'll shrink up as it dries. So we're going to do the same thing, 2 fingers at a time because of the size of my container. I'm bending the wrist up so that the fingers don't bend at all. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing. So nice, slow, controlled dip. 2, 3. Okay. I'm going to lean it forward a little bit and get it into the elastic holes. That'll help to just seal everything in. Alright, so we got those 2. Being careful not to touch the Plastidip that I have on the other fingers. I'm going to now do the remaining 2 fingers. I'll just curl these ones over so that they are out of the way as I do this. You can also do this to the fingers before you install them. So I just kind of did this backwards this time around. There we go. Slowly pull it out. Alright, so now we have our first coating of Plastidip, and I'm going to hang this up somewhere to dry. What you can do is you can allow this to cure for about 30 minutes, I believe. Let me double check on the instructions here. Yeah, 30 minutes. So you can allow this to cure for 30 minutes, and then you can do a second coat to make the Plastidip thicker and more durable. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take and pour the excess back into the can and let this drain off. That way you can get as many uses out of your can of Plastidip as possible. We'll kind of let's get some of the excess off of here. Okay, there we go. And then yeah, you want to throw this container out, throw it out outside, you know, in your exterior garbage, so that you aren't getting fumes in your house. And then the thing to do to seal this up really nicely again is to just kind of tap around the perimeter with a hammer like you would a paint can. Okay, so that was the final step. This is a little ventilation booth that I built into my garage. I've got a vent fan here, and then and some fabric I can lay down to enclose it. That way it pulls air in, and then there's ducting that takes the fumes outside. So that's what I'm going to let this dry in. And there we have the hand as it dries. And then after I do a second coat, it's going to be ready to send off to the recipient.